Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where President Trump held the very first cabinet meeting of his second administration, using the moment to reassert his push for total authority over the federal government, while reminding his team that he calls the shots.
Is it your view of your authority that you have the power to call up any one of or all of the people seated at this table and issue orders that they're bound to follow?
Oh, yeah, they'll follow the orders, yes, they will.
No exceptions?
No exception. Well, let's see, let me think. Oh, yeah. She'll have an exception. Of course, no exceptions. You know that.
The president also made clear that the sweeping cuts to the government will continue and that Elon Musk, who was front and center in today's cabinet meeting, will continue to run point.
If you had heard anything about members of the cabinet who weren't happy with the way things were going, and if so, what are you doing to address those any dissatisfaction?
Elon, let the cabinet speak just for a second. Is anybody unhappy with Elon? If you are, well, throw him out of here. Is anybody unhappy?
Now, Musk, who Mr. Trump asked to speak before any of his cabinet officials, said he's just following the president's orders, while also seeking to clarify the intent behind a government-wide email telling employees to justify what they did last week or face the threat of termination.
I guess there was like last week, the president encouraged me via Truth Social and also via phone call to be more aggressive. And I was like, okay, yes, sir, Mr. President, we will indeed do that. The president is the commander-in-chief. I do what the president asks. Our goal is not to be capricious or unfair. We want to give people every opportunity to send an email. And the email could simply be, what I'm working on is too sensitive or classified to describe. Like literally just, that would be sufficient. I think this is just common sense.
And today's cabinet meeting came as the White House, in a new memo, directed federal agencies to prepare for mass layoffs, citing President Trump's election victory as a justification. Mr. Trump answered numerous other questions from reporters for more than an hour as his cabinet sat largely silent, with the president addressing everything from the war in Ukraine to looming tariffs to his continued insistence that Canada should become a U.S. state. We'll touch on all of that throughout this hour. I am joined now by NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez. Also with me is Bobby Allen, technology reporter for NPR, who has covered Elon Musk extensively. Thanks to both of you for being here. Gabe, let me start with you. Look, we knew that Elon Musk was going to be in the cabinet meeting, but I think that a lot of folks were surprised that he played such a prominent role. What were the key takeaways?
Hi there, Kristen. Well, certainly it was incredibly unusual, as you mentioned. This is not a cabinet member, of course, that led off this meeting and spoke for a considerable amount of time, whereas those cabinet secretaries were forced to become audience members for a large portion of this first cabinet meeting of the new Trump administration. Now, as you said, Elon Musk is defending why he is trying to slash the federal government, and he's further defended the email that he sent several days ago, saying that it was just to see if federal workers had a pulse, that it wasn't meant to be any sort of review. But President Trump today, he also went a little bit further. He's saying that it is possible that these employees, if they don't respond, could be fired, saying that they're, quote, on the bubble, Kristen.
And Gabe, I have to ask you to do a little bit of fact checking here, because the president and Musk continued to tout the savings Doge has uncovered, talked about the receipts to back up the claims. What do people need to know here?
Well, Kristen, we have been hearing from the White House, from either Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt over the last several weeks, and we just heard from President Trump today at this cabinet meeting, and from Elon Musk, that Doge has cut some $65 billion so far. But a closer look at those numbers reveals, Kristen, that some of that were contracts that had either expired or were about to expire, and there are a lot of questions about how they get to that number. From our analysis of it, while the true number is very hard to tell, it does appear to be much lower than that $65 billion. Now, the New York Times also points out that several of the biggest items on the initial list that were posted on DOJ's website as major cuts, they were removed from that list, 5 items, and yet the total number of the total amount that they claim to have cut still has not been lowered. So still a lot of questions, and the White House really has not provided exact specific receipts of where all those supposed cuts are coming from.
Yeah, and I know that reporters will continue to ask for those receipts. Before I turn to Bobby, I want to ask you, the White House Budget Director Russell Vought, acting OPM Director Charles Ezell sent a memo to agencies basically telling them to prepare for large-scale layoffs. What more can you tell us about this memo, Gabe?
Well, Kristen, we have been hearing about thousands of cuts in the federal workforce over the last several weeks, and the fear of many more among many of those federal workers we've been speaking with. But yes, as you said, just now, agency heads got that email from the Office of Personnel Management telling them to prepare for a large-scale reduction in force, and that agency heads should come forward with some sort of reorganization plan by March 13th, about 2 weeks away, Kristen.
All right, Bobby, let me turn to you now. Let's talk about Elon Musk. He addressed that email that was sent to federal employees last week. And I want to play you a little bit and then get your reaction on the other side.
I think that email perhaps was misinterpreted as a performance review, but actually it was a pulse check review. Do you have a pulse? Do you have a pulse and 2 neurons? So if you have a pulse and 2 neurons, you can reply to an email. This is, I think not a high bar, is what I'm saying. This is, anyone could accomplish this?
Bobby, people who've worked with Elon Musk before say they're actually quite familiar with getting these types of notes from him. What can you tell us about this type of strategy?
Yeah, this email was quintessential Elon Musk. It was done impulsively. It was done without telling a number of his lieutenants. It shocked more than 2 million people across the federal government. But he does it because he knows there are very few checks on his power and what he does day to day from the White House. I mean, I saw when I was covering Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter that he operated exactly this way. Employees would get messages from him at 12 at night, at 2 in the morning, on the weekends, saying one thing and then quickly followed by something that, maybe scales it back, and then followed by something that might contradict it a few days later. He is a chaos agent. He operates and thrives in mayhem. And the people really caught in the middle here are the civil servants, the more than 2 million people across the federal government. And they are obviously now, the target of Elon Musk's sledgehammer. I mean, he is staging this war against the bureaucracy, going after what he says is fraud and government largesse and abuse. But in the meantime, it's just causing so much panic and so much confusion from all of these federal workers who don't really know how to respond to these antics.
Yeah, and we've seen some of that frustration bubble up at town halls, quite frankly, all across the country. Bobby, is this basically how he runs his businesses?
It is. I mean, he doesn't like having to get anything approved by anyone. It's why if you or I try to get comments, say, from Tesla right now, if there was a big announcement, there isn't a communications shop. That's extremely unusual for a company that large, with that large of a market share. The biggest EV company in the U.S. doesn't have any communications team. It might seem like a small thing, but again, it's a window into how he operates. He likes to be, almost a little dictator of his companies, meaning that he does what he wants with very few people challenging him, without a communications person or a lawyer saying, maybe we should rephrase this, maybe we should wait, maybe we should get buy-in from other individuals. That is not the Elon Musk way, and that might work, just fine at a private company. But when you're bringing that strategy to the federal government, which has, many laws and norms and protocol, and typically moves a lot more slowly, methodically, and is a little bit more orderly than an Elon Musk company, you're going to see a bit of chaos, and that's what we're witnessing right now. Chaos that Elon Musk is himself triggering across the whole federal government.
Well, let me follow up with you, because you said that he actually thrives in this chaos. President Trump not afraid to create chaos as well. Is this a part of their underlying strategy as this shakeup gets underway?
Yeah, it's hard to have an X-ray into Elon Musk's mind to know exactly what his end goal is, but from, talking to his biographers, people close to him, people who have worked very closely with Elon, he is thinking kind of hour by hour, day by day. Sometimes he's not even sure if his opinion will, be the same today as it might be a week or a month from now. He's very much living in the moment. And yeah, there is this theory that, Musk, like Trump, they're sort of flooding the zone with so much information and so many announcements that would cause upheaval that it's just hard for everyone to keep up. It's kind of head spinning, and that confusion is kind of the point. But when it comes to Elon, again, he's just, I don't know how else to put it, he's just a really impulsive person, and he's very much driven by grievance. Just go over to his account on X and you'll see if somebody ticks him off, he will immediately attack them. And because of his power, because of his influence, because of, just how much clout he has in the White House, yes, he has some supporters, but a lot of critics right now, and he's often responding to try to quell or put down some of that criticism.
Well, it's just fascinating to get your perspective. Bobby Allen, thank you so much. Gabe Gutierrez, thank you for your reporting from the White House. As we mentioned, the president also making headlines in his cabinet meeting about the war in Ukraine, as both U.S. and Ukrainian officials say they are close to an agreement that would give the U.S. access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals in exchange for some kind of economic or security assistance. Now, President Trump said President Zelenskyy will be coming to the White House on Friday to sign that deal, but that U.S. security guarantees are not a part of it.
I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that because it's in, we're talking about Europe as their next door neighbor. But we're going to make sure everything goes well. And as you know, we'll be making we'll be really partnering with Ukraine in terms of rare earth. We very much need rare earth. They have great rare earth. We provided a great thing. I mean, we've provided something very important. And we'll be working with Ukraine, and because we'll be taking that, we're going to be taking what we're entitled to take.
If the Russians get to keep the territory that they claim by force, doesn't that send a dangerous message, let's say, to China about Taiwan?
Okay. You try and take it away, right? We're gonna do the best we can. We're gonna do the best we can to make the best deal we can for both sides. But for Ukraine, we're gonna try very hard to make a good deal so that they can get as much back as possible.
Now, in his nightly address, President Zelenskyy said he was coming to meet President Trump for negotiations. Zelenskyy has long pushed for continued security guarantees from the U.S., saying today that without them, there will not be a lasting ceasefire. Meanwhile, Russia has now also proposed a potential deal to the Trump administration where the U.S. would gain some ownership of rare earth minerals in parts of Russian-controlled territory in Ukraine. That's according to two U.S. officials familiar with the matter. Joining me now is NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube, who's at the Pentagon, and also with me is Gracelin, Baskaran, director of the Critical Minerals Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much to both of you for joining me. Courtney, let me start with you. President Zelenskyy said again today that the deal of rare earth minerals could be part of a broader security guarantee. What is your sense of how this package is coming together?
Yeah, so it seems pretty clear that the Trump administration sees an economic deal as being the security guarantee that the U.S. is willing to offer Ukraine right now. So in other words, if the United States and Ukraine are engaged in some sort of a deal that involves extracting rare earth minerals, building infrastructure in Ukraine to try to build that enterprise, that presence alone would be the security guarantee that the United States, at this point, the Trump administration is willing to make for Ukraine. Of course, President Zelenskyy, on the other hand, is looking for something a little bit more tangible in the way of military security guarantees. So some of the things he spoke about in Munich, the idea of creating basically a European army, something that would not include the United States, of course, but an army that was for the countries in Europe that would be inherent to the continent. He's also spoken about, obviously, NATO membership or some sort of a guarantee for an eventual NATO membership. That, according to what we are hearing, and frankly, what President Trump has been saying openly now does not seem to be on the table with this deal. The deal itself actually has changed dramatically from what we first heard about 2 weeks ago when Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, went to Kyiv, met with President Zelenskyy, and according to officials who are familiar with the meeting, essentially handed him a deal and said, you have 1 hour to sign this, and the United States is taking over 50% of Ukraine's critical minerals. Well, of course, he did not sign that. It's not even clear that he would have the authority to do so. What we're hearing now about this deal, it seems like it's much more favorable to Ukraine. In fact, no one side would have total ownership, not the United States or Ukraine. Both sides would invest money that would then benefit Ukraine. The money would be invested into Ukraine. And very critically here, Kristen, neither the United States nor Ukraine could sell their part without the other side agreeing to whomever buys it.
Oh, that's fascinating, and there have been so many twists and turns to this, Courtney. We'll have to see how it comes together and what, if anything, happens between now and Friday when President Zelenskyy is supposed to be here. Let me ask you quickly, as we are reporting and as you are reporting, Russia's also proposing a potential deal over Ukraine's rare earth minerals in the territory that it illegally seized. I spoke with Ukrainian officials who were frankly outraged by that proposal. Tell me about your reporting.
Yeah, so this is something that the Russian delegation who met with U.S. officials in Riyadh last week to discuss this overall potential peace deal in Ukraine. They came to the table with a potential offer, at least elements of an offer, where the United States would have some sort of a deal that would involve them having some rights or some extraction ability for some of the critical minerals in eastern Ukraine. Specifically, they were talking about Donetsk and down by Zaporizhia, which I'm sure you will discuss further in this segment, includes some very important minerals like lithium and like graphite. Now, it's not clear at this point. It doesn't appear that there was any actual agreement that came out of this. But remember, Kristen, officials came out and were very positive about how the talks occurred. But one of the big elements that has not been discussed here is what is also in the ground in that area of the Russian-controlled area that are thousands, tens of thousands of unexploded ordnance and landmines that would have to be safely removed before many of these areas could be safely mined.
That's a really important point, Courtney, that we probably don't spend enough time focusing on. So thank you for including that. Really appreciate it. Gracelin, let me turn to you. Help us and help folks who are watching right now understand why President Trump wants access to these rare earth minerals. Specifically, what are they used for?
Rare earths are the bedrock of national security, economic competitiveness, and energy resilience. They are virtually in every defense technology, from fighter jets to ships to missiles to lasers, tanks, ICT technology. They're also in wind turbines. They are in advanced semiconductors. Rare earths are actually a group of 17 elements, and they're a bit of a misnomer because they're not actually rare. They're just difficult to extract, often found in small deposits. The reason President Trump and actually President Biden prioritized rare earths is because they were one of the first resources that China weaponized. Back in 2010, Japan and China got into a fishing trawler dispute, and China cut off rare earth exports to Japan. Now, the big problem with this is that China processes 90% of the world's rare earths. What we've seen the U.S. do over the last 5 years is they've actually invested $300 million through the Defense Production Act to build rare earth processing facilities here at home in the United States. This is a big deal because for heavy rare earths, China processes about 99.5%. However, geology is where geology is, and we actually only have about 1.5% of the world's rare earths here at home in the U.S. So what we've done over the last year is really start to look at strategic investments in rare earths elsewhere to bring them back home to the U.S. to process in Texas and California. So we've seen countries like Brazil, Ukraine, Greenland come into strategic focus to reduce our own vulnerability to further supply chain disruptions.
And given that Ukraine is in the middle of a war, this speaks to the point that Courtney's addressing. I mean, how challenging might it be to actually access these rare earth minerals?
There are many challenges, and ultimately, the U.S. government is not a mining company. It can create an enabling environment for the private sector to mine. some of the clear challenges that we have, we don't even have good data on rare earths in Ukraine. The former Director General of Ukrainian Geological Survey has said there's no modern mapping of rare earths, which means that we don't have a good understanding of what is a commercially viable deposit to mine. So that's our first challenge. Second challenge is mining, exploration mining are incredibly energy intensive. Globally, it uses about 15% of electricity consumption. A lot of that energy was wiped out during the invasion. And then three is there is an ongoing security risk. As Courtney noted, there's no security guarantee included. There is a hope that there's an implicit guarantee because of that economic cooperation. But, you know, the private sector needs more than that. The conflict between Ukraine and Russia has been simmering for 11 years, and the possibility of another potential expansion of occupied land is never beyond the realm of possibility. So given the average mine costs $500 million to $1 billion, they're not racing to make that given the risk of further land expropriation.
Well, you explained well just how complicated and complex it would be. Just very quickly, in terms of a timeline, let's say that they do sign a deal this week. How long might it take for the United States to actually be able to access these rare earth minerals?
The answer is a very long time. So on average, we got to map it first, right? Mapping takes time. Then globally, on average, from the time I identify a deposit to the time that I have a producing mine is 18 years. So really, we're looking at about 20 years in terms of the development of a new asset. President Zelenskyy very strategically negotiated that no current producing assets will go into this investment fund in terms of that 50% of revenue. It's only new assets in the future. So really, we're looking at a 20-year lead time here and potentially longer, depending on, you know, I mean, in the U.S., it takes much longer than 20 years. It's 29 years.
Okay. Well, you made it very clear. It would be long and complicated. Gracelin, Baskaran, thank you so much for taking us inside what this deal is really all about. Appreciate it. Courtney, Kube, great reporting as always.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.